Interestingly, I'm going to try and make the point today that self-control needs to be chapter one, because without it, you can do everything else pretty well, but you're probably not exercising self-control if you don't do it well.
Tell me more.
Without self-control, you're not going to be able to actively listen. You're just not. You're going to talk too much. You're not going to ask the right questions. You are probably likely not checking into the next chapter in terms of needs. You're probably thinking more about yourself than your client if you're not exercising self-control, because by nature, we know that humans tend to be self-focused, and then you go down the list to even asking questions and building rapport. Can one build rapport and not be exercising self-control? I would submit not. You have to show people that you care and that you have control of the controllables before they're going to like and trust you, which was the central tenet of building rapport: know, like, and trust. How do you build trust with someone if you can't take care of yourself or exercise discipline? In my opinion, after thinking about this, self-control is the glue that holds everything together.
First of all, let me say that I love how much you're studying my work, the book, the concepts. I love it. Like, it's perfect. I want to welcome you back to Conversations About Conversations. We actually started recording when you started saying that brilliant stuff, but I want to welcome our audience to us. I'm back with Alex Brown for chapter 5 of Conversations, which is all about exercising self-control. And of course, you've started the debate: should chapter 5 be chapter 1?
Right.
I'm going to exercise the self-control to not even take on the debate.
Good. Great.
But welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. And this is a fun chapter. You and I had been talking about this chapter, and I really hadn't thought about self-control that much. I mean, I've thought about dieting, and I've thought about sticking to a plan, and I've certainly done what you do, which is I put my everything in an Excel spreadsheet these days, which is an exercise in self-control in and of itself, because you hold yourself accountable. But as it relates to this topic, my sincere belief is this is first and foremost, and I know it doesn't really matter which order of chapter. I know this is chapter 5 in the book, but it requires a lot of self-reflection, introspection, and an honest assessment, a very open and transparent assessment. How much self-discipline do I have? And when it comes to speaking, we often get that gut check on a diet because our suit doesn't fit or our dress doesn't fit if you're a lady. We get it in other areas of our life, but I'm not so sure, unless we have a client storm out, that we get it in as direct of way often, other than they might leave us eventually and not really provide us direct feedback. They might do a survey. But so I thought about that, and it's really fascinating. I kind of went around the house, and I've got some work to do on self-control, according to the kids, which they don't lie.
Alex, the first sentence of the chapter might help some people think about their level of self-control. And it really comes down to this. So the first sentence goes, have you ever looked back at a conversation and thought, that could have gone better, and wanted to start it over again? I have, and I do often.
Yeah.
So I think it's like a clue is not anything other than, did the conversation go as optimally as you wanted it to? And if it didn't, then look to, okay, well, what was I doing to control myself? And it's very much a controlling self that we're talking about. I work with a lot of people that want to be able to control conversations. I'm one of those people too. I want to control the outcome, but to be very clear, you can't control another person. Well, okay,
Right.
Because especially if you can't even control yourself, how are you going to control another person? We often talk about conversation control, but really it all starts at home with self-control.
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you. And there's also a metaphor that I am a big fan of in the beginning of the chapter. It's about athletes right? Like we know that there's these amazing athletes who can, like in football, wide receiver stretches out, grabs the ball, taps their toes inbound. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, the defender is falling on top of them and they somehow get their toes inbound and score a touchdown. And so in sports, it really is body control. In business and conversations, it's self-control.
Think of all the iterations that those players go through to get that good. And in fact, when you watch it in real time, you don't even know if he actually put his toe down. And it requires critical analysis where they're reviewing it by 3 or 4 experts. And he barely got the toe down, right? It's some miraculous play. But the amount of iterations to get there, to have that type of control, it's astounding. And that's true in conversations too. And you make the point that you need to go through and look at it not only from your viewpoint as the quote unquote player, but from the fan, like from what we're watching as we watch the football game, to stick with this. And then also to look at it as another third party, like the ref, that's just, the person making the judgment. And you mentioned that in your chapter. Look at it from all 3 views. I think what jumps out at one when they read that, at least it did for me, is when you put yourself in that third position, not the client's position, the player, not your position as the speaker or the person controlling the conversation, but the referee in this case, the third party. It affords you an ability to be more free thinking and really be more critical, because now you're putting yourself in the objective third party position. And so what I found is, if I'm going to judge myself in a conversation, other than asking for that feedback from the person I'm speaking to, the next best thing, or maybe even better in some cases, is to just say, if I was an outside observer watching that conversation, what would I say? And it frees me from any emotional baggage of judging myself.
Yeah, you got the concept, because that is a concept from the chapter of
it's in there.
Paying attention to a conversation from your perspective, from their perspective, and then the perspective of someone independently watching. Like, what would they say about the conversation? I like how you tied that into my metaphor. I want to give some more clues to our audience, clues that they may need to work on their self-control. So these are clues from my own life, and they're straight out of the book. Number 1, I would get defensive and angry and lose my cool or argue.
Yep.
That's definitely a clue. Number 2, I interrupted frequently, and I was frequently interrupted in return.
Yeah.
Noticing the interruptions, definitely something to dial back and say, okay, what am I doing here? 3rd, volunteering unnecessary information, which led the conversation down the wrong path. Of course, we have an opportunity ourselves to improve that control about going down a rabbit hole and saying, did we really want to take the conversation down that path?
Right.
But those are 3 of the examples where it's like, oh yeah. Or things like, another example is, I talked when I really would have benefited both myself and my client if I had just been quiet and listened.
Right. I think those are all great. And then when I read that, what I thought of when I read that in the book is, when you interrupt or when you speak over someone or they interrupt you, it's pretty clear when it happens. To tie it back to the book, you mentioned that, wait a minute, when you are the one directing, quote unquote, the conversation, you are the one that's responsible for the outcome, not the client or patient or whoever you're speaking with. It's you. And so I think that changes the dynamic, because you have to take ownership now. And so you can't just say, well, he interrupted me, I'm going to interrupt him, or I'm going to talk over that person. You've got to realize that if you want to get to your objective and you're going to be held responsible for the outcome, that you are now going to have to control, to the extent that one can, the direction of the conversation. To me, that's what jumped out in that section of the chapter.
I like that you might think it's the basis and or maybe could be the first chapter. I kind of look at it as, we've gone through the first 4 chapters. We've talked about how rapport is important, how using questions skillfully is important. Then if you're going to take the time to use questions, to listening, and then dial into what are we listening for? We're
Yeah.
listening for needs. And so where I put this as the 5th chapter is now, it's almost like a now look backwards. Like, okay, we've gone to the trouble to do those 4 important things. And yes, we can't do them if there isn't self-control. So I kind of put it as a bookend to what I
Yeah.
see as the first half of the book. All 10 chapters are important. I really, when I took the almost 2 years to write the book, really boiled it down to the 10 most important lessons that I took away. And while I was working with my writing coach, she said, and I agreed, although it's a daunting task, that each chapter in and of itself could be its own book. And
Yeah.
I hold that for someday. And depending on how much, always wait for time. It's really a matter of
Right.
it. But I think, Alex, if I had hundreds of students just like you and your voracious appetite for mastering it, not just reading it, not just reading it once or twice or 3 times, but really, and I'm so grateful, mastering it, then yeah, because there's so many levels of it. Like we're just scratching the surface.
Like, let's say I read 10 pages of this, a particular area, then I go back and read it again. I can actually put it into play. And you mentioned about directing in the chapter, play, rewind, stop, pause. I can play this anytime or rewind and throw in any conversation. I can use this book. And the cool thing is, you read a lot of books about a lot of different topics, and so do I. And I may or may not use that unless I'm doing a specific thing. I read about fly fishing. Well, I'm only going to use it when I'm fly fishing, which is maybe 10 days a year, maybe 20 on a good year. And I have a conversation every single day from the second I get up to the second I go to bed. And so I get to use this. It's not like it's something that's atrophying, right? I use this every day. So one of the beauties of this is, and I think this is, it cannot be oversold, is that this book is something that you use 16 hours a day, assuming you get 8 hours of sleep. Very few things that I've read, I can say that about. Very few. I mean, you read the news, that's yesterday's news. I don't care anymore. Like, I read it, it was great. I thought about it for a minute, but then it's a new paper. Or a new news story. And so I really think the fact that we get to use it all day, every day, 365 days a year in business, personal, self-development, it's in every facet of your life. I think that this needs to be a core curriculum starting when you can start to articulate words. The concepts should be first and foremost, before we learn math, before we do anything, how to have a conversation. Imagine the impact this book could have on kids that are now having trouble communicating if they would have learned these concepts in elementary school. Just imagine. Imagine.
I feel like singing John Lennon.
Yeah. But I'm not joking. I'm dead serious, because your kids come to you trying to communicate things, and we spend so much time trying to regurgitate stuff from books, but we're not teaching them how to listen and these techniques.
Well, it's like so obvious that it's right in front of us. And you think about, you could graduate college and not know how to balance a checkbook or to do your taxes or how to get
Right.
a job. And you could go through school and not have any guidance whatsoever about the most important skill in life. And that is communicating with others. Obviously, the most important skill in business. So it's like so obvious to me, but I've dedicated my time, myself, many years, and probably the rest of my life to making that available to people.
Yeah. And what an impact. I mean, what an impact, right? To rewind, as the chapter says, the idea of thinking about a conversation as sort of a director, like put yourself in a director's chair, is beautiful. Because for us visual folks, or even kinesthetic folks, you picture the thing like action, and then you can rewind and fast forward to keep yourself on course. And you may even have to have something in your hand to say, let's rewind here or something, but you can engage all senses. And I think that idea to teach someone, whether they're an adult or a child or anyone in between, adolescent, that you can kind of direct things by using the stop and to equate it to something they're familiar with is so cool. I mean, I never really thought about stopping and teaching people how to rewind a conversation and back up and pause and ask for the pause and give them different techniques to do that. And I can think of 100, more than that, hundreds of conversations where if I would have employed these techniques and paused, I could have had a better outcome, much better outcome.
Fast forward is a good feature as well.
Yeah, which you're going to do right now, right?
Well, Alex, we're beginning to bring this episode to a close, but I know there's a few concepts that you wanted to make sure we talked about. So go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan. I keep a list of the things from the book that have been most impactful for me on an everyday basis. And because I'm making lots of phone calls and doing lots of Zoom meetings and now doing in-person meetings, I've added this chapter: go slow, which means slow down. You're not listening if you're talking very quickly. You're not listening as well. Go low, which means lower the volume to show this is a significant point. One concept at a time. This becomes critical when taking complex ideas, whether they're financial or whatever they may be, medical. Use the client's name. We all love to hear our name, right, Ivan? And give it a rest. That means just talk less. As we were talking about this chapter, I went into my usual Sunday routine, which I go to a house of worship every Sunday. The sermon was on self-control, and I thought, well, that's timely. And one of this is something my dad used to say a lot: be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. And that really, I think, sums it up. I'll say it one more time. Swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. And if you think about that, is in one sentence an exercise in self-control.
Yes, it is. Well, I'd like to close with one of the last paragraphs of the chapter. And it's in the conclusion of the chapter to really invite people to think about this. Think about approaching each conversation with the idea that it's your behavior in the conversation that's going to be decisive. In other words, your ability to exercise self-control in your conversations with your clients or your prospects will determine how and where the relationship goes. Because a single conversation could be productive, maybe doesn't go anywhere, or even takes a relationship backward. It truly is. Our relationships are made up of conversations. And just like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, a relationship is only as strong as its weakest conversation. So I want to leave everybody with that. And Alex, I want to thank you for being an ongoing part of this conversation about conversations.
Thanks, Ivan. Great chapter.